Bonjour. Bonne année, Sarah.
Bonne année, Stéphane, and welcome to you all to So French, the show about the twists and turns, intrigues and insights to all things French.
Every 2 weeks we select the best, most interesting and fascinating of French news stories, all brought to you from a studio in the heart of Paris. My name is Stefan Vries.
And my name is Sara Bertilsson.
This week we'll talk about the crowdfunding controversy grappling France.
And is the French's love affair with cigarettes soon to be up in smoke? Neutral packaging and extreme price hikes seem to have changed one of Europe's top smoking nations' attitudes towards tobacco.
And you probably had a lovely Christmas, but one very prominent businessman spent the holidays all alone in a Japanese cell. Renault's Carlos Ghosn claims he's innocent on tax avoidance charges, but the Japanese still keep him in jail.
Now, first, from the 15th of January and 2 months onwards, France will hold what President Emmanuel Macron has termed the Great National Debate, a public consultation to discuss the essential questions facing the nation after nearly 2 months of sometimes violent and sometimes, at least very disruptive, we must say, yellow vest protests. However, as always, I think we can say this initiative has caused some, some controversy even before it's kicked off. And it's, it's sort of, and this week started with the refusal to lead the consultations by one of its head figures, Chantal Joanneau.
Yeah, she's a former minister of Sarkozy, minister of sports, and she's now a high civil servant. And she was chosen to head the consultations. But then it became known how much she actually was earning, because, of course, the Yellow Vests, it all started with demonstrations for more purchasing power, more money. The Yellow Vests claimed that they earn not enough to have a decent living. Now, of course, when they learned that the president of this commission was earning how much?
15,000 euros a month.
15,000 euros a month. Well, of course, they got very angry. So Chantal Joanneau, she decided to, no longer to head the consultations, but she's a president of the Commission Nationale du Débat National, the National Commission of the debate. Actually, have you ever heard of that commission?
No, I had never, and I think very few French had ever heard about this commission before now. Actually, and the thing is, this is a commission that exists since decades.
Yeah, exactly.
We learned in charge of debates such as how France will denuclearize, or
tackle climate change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all these issues. So the money that Chantal Joanneau, her salary, wasn't fixed just to lead this national consultation or the national debate. It's a salary that has been fixed when she actually got the job to head this commission. But still, of course, we can understand that it's a bit controversial.
Yeah, it's about the same salary as as Emmanuel Macron, the president of the Republic, and they're about. It also got known that there are about 500 civil servants in France who earn more than the French president. So it's
and that's the thing. And this is nothing, but maybe it's sort of symptomatic as well, and it shows the issues. Well, the base of what the Yellow Vest movement is about. That you have actually so many civil servants that are making these kind of salaries.
Now, this is a controversy about the salary, but there's also a controversy about the topics. What's this national debate actually about, Sarah?
Well, it has been decided that you cannot debate anything in the national debate.
Oh, that's nice. Democratic.
So there are 4 topics that had been set up by the government.
Yeah.
It's the green transition, tax issues, democracy and citizenship, and the organization of the state and public services. And how this is going to work out? Well, it's still sort of they're trying to set out exactly how it's going to work, but already in town halls across the country, the mayors have been, receiving suggestions and propositions from their inhabitants on what, how they think that the society should be organized. And a couple of them have already actually been sent through to the government. And what we can see so far is that many is regarding the social justice and financial justice, lowering politicians' salaries, for example, and also then civil servant salaries, or those who are the privileged in society, we can say. The reinstatement of the tax on wealth, which we remember was abandoned by Macron. Mm-hmm. A halt to some of the tax cuts for businesses, that's also been put in place by Macron, and previously, before him, we can also say by his predecessor, François Hollande. Nationalization of the country's highways. An increase of the minimum wage, known here in France as the SMIC, and more money to social welfare programs. And all these suggestions will then have to be treated and put into some kind of local debate.
Everybody likes,
Yeah.
But it's, of course, completely, this is not what Macron wanted when he was elected, of course. So he's acting very hastily. It's in a reaction, actually. So he's not in control anymore.
Well, one can wonder how yes, as you say, this was the major suggestion that he came up with when he gave his speech in the beginning of December to react to the Yellow Vest protesters. And what we can see is, of course, that it's not very thought through, because it's 65 million people living, all citizens in France. To create a national debate is very complicated, and to create a national debate in a month, or to organize it in a month's time during Christmas holidays and everything, is, of course, almost impossible. But what's also interesting is what will not be debated.
Yes,
because there are restrictions.
So the government is basically saying when and what you're allowed to say or not,
and what you're not allowed to say.
Yeah, exactly. So what's on this list?
Well, you're not allowed to
taboos?
talk. You are not allowed to talk about same-sex marriage, for example. You're not allowed to talk about the right to abortion. You're not allowed to discuss the death penalty either. And there will probably be some other topics that will be added to that list. This has, of course, also been very criticized. And the reason why these specific topics have come up is, of course, because among the many, when they were doing votes within the Yellow Vest movements and on their platforms, those were the topics that actually came up top.
Yeah, but we've seen already that some lobbies are more or less hijacking the national debate.
And this is what the government is trying to put an end to.
You were mentioning the same-sex marriage, but that's, of course, the Manif pour tous of a couple of years ago. And they are very active as well now, again, on the online platforms to influence this national debate. But the government is not taking that into account. Now, of course, how is this supposed to work, as the government has promised to push through its reform plan? And then at the same time asking suggestions from the French population. What's going to happen when...
It's very confusing because, of course, when you have one of the topics being tax issues, for example, Emmanuel Macron and his government, they already have a very clear idea and reform plan for France. So, and they're saying that they're going to push through with this agenda.
Because he was elected.
He was elected on this agenda, of course. And this will then happen at the same time as we're having this national debate where they're saying that we really want to get suggestions and ideas. It's quite, I think it's quite confusing at the moment to see where these suggestions will actually end up and how influential they will be on the government's politics.
Absolutely. And at the same time, the economical time bomb is still ticking because unemployment is still rising. There's very low economic growth. The protests have cost billions and billions of euros to French businesses. About 50,000 people I read in the Le Monde that are temporarily unemployed due to the protests of the Yellow Vest. So the economic cost is very high. And of course, this country, as many politicians say and many analysts say, is out of money. So it's going to be extremely complicated. It looks like Macron will be totally paralyzed actually for the next 3 years that's left of his mandate. What do you think?
I don't know. Well, he doesn't act. Well, he's saying he will not be paralyzed. At least he's promising to push through with his reform plan. So, of course, we will see what everything will be depending on what happens with the yellow vests. Of course, they are planning a new act, as they call it, of their protests this weekend. Again, last weekend we saw a surge in number of protesters after sort of a dip over the holidays. Last weekend we saw more than 20,000 more protesters than the previous weekend. So of course they are gaining some momentum, and it doesn't look like they're willing to give up or to stop their protest until they see some very clear and real improvement of their living conditions.
And in the meantime, Macron is hiding in his castle in l'Élysée, and he's only communicating through Twitter. So it's and he's supposed to go out next week to launch the national debate. But of course, I think there will be many protests and the security measures will be very tight. But
we're also waiting for his letter to the French.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's going to send us a letter, right?
Yes. Unless if the postal officials are on strike.
Yeah, that's always going to happen in this country. But it is a very, sad turn of events, of course, if you remember how enthusiastic a lot of French people were when he was elected, and especially in the rest of Europe, just a young leader of this country, and now nothing has really left.
Vous écoutez So French.
You are listening to So French.
Now, Stefan, we have seen crowdfundings for birthdays or end of the year presents for teachers. Even crowdfundings here in France to save old castles from falling into ruins.
Yeah.
But this last week, France has been grappling with a crowdfunding controversy few had imagined.
Indeed. It all started at the beginning of this week, or actually already over the weekend, with the creation of a crowdfunding, how would you call it, common pot, for a certain Christophe Détinger. He was filmed over the last weekend while attacking two police officers. He's a former professional boxer, so his punches were really professional and quite violent as well. He was quickly identified as a former French champion. He was then, he issued an apology on internet, made a video, and then he turned himself in to the police, and he's still in custody now. But then a crowdfunding was set up to pay for his legal fees. And in 24 hours, more than 8,000 people had contributed with nearly 120,000 euros. And then what happened?
But outrage happened.
Yeah.
The internet happened. People got absolutely outraged over the fact that, there was a collect of money for someone who was so violently punching a police officer. Not only general citizens or normal citizens, of course, police officers and the government, we should say. The government saying that this crowdfunding was disgraceful and it encouraged violence against the police. Now, Litchi, which was the host of this crowdfunding, they initially actually defended it. They say that they're, as a platform, are neutral. But this is interesting because when internet starts reacting, things can go very, very quickly.
Yeah,
because, so this crowdfunding actually was up for a little bit more than 24 hours. And in the beginning of the day, this was on Tuesday last week, Litchi said then, we are neutral. After a couple of hours, they're suddenly no longer that neutral because then they hid the amount that was collected. And then a couple of hours later, after even more politicians and more police officers and more celebrities had said what they thought about this crowdfunding, well, Litchi actually read its own rules and decided that this was against the rules and they closed down this fundraiser.
Lawyers say that it's actually nonsense to close it down.